Alright, time for another DraftPhysics.com, DebatePhysics.com also. But the debate is in a disgusting, putrid, horrible form where others can't actually make arguments where they can illustrate it with either evidence produced by some other party, their own evidence, or even a rational model or description, including this bit. So there's a simple argument regarding gravity that it's completely understandable as a time-dependent force. And yes, if you want to believe distance is important, you can pretend it's true, but you can't deny that time is a critical element. And so I've used this very simple illustration. You have a gravitational body. It has its zones of gravity. I could mark a distance here. I can mark a distance here. I could mark a distance here. And I could just call any one of these a place you're going to drive through the field of force being created by the gravitational body. And there's a certain amount of gravity that will pass through, so to speak, a force differential that will be associated with this line. This line will be producing, that is, there'll be a certain amount of force differential crossing from this point A to this point B. Now it might be 4.9 meters per second gravity over here. Well, it'd be the other way around. It might be 4.9 here when you started, and it might be 9.8 here when you finish. Doesn't really matter. We're talking about you traveling from this distance to this distance, and the idea is you're trying to go straight from point A to point B. And gravity is the only thing that's going to stop you from going straight. So any bending of your path will be entirely caused by this force, which is a constant amount. There's a constant amount of force traveling across this plane per unit of time. This is per 1 second, 9.8 per 1 second, 4.9 per 1 second. That's the amount, the rate, the stream flow, the flow of rain, the flow of photons, the flow of water. Doesn't matter, that's the flow. Now, Leonard Susskind agrees that's how it works. Basically, he models it the same exact way. So I can take any point A and point B in any part of space and make this argument that what's going to really matter is how much time you're in the force. So how much time it takes you to get from point A to point B will dictate how much your path will be bent. And the slower you're traversing this distance, the more you're likely to have to overcome the force by applying a counter force. So to stay on this path, you will have to apply more counter force the longer it takes you to get from point A to point B. The faster you go, the less exposure you have, the less second you spend in the force. The slower you go, the more seconds you spend in the force, the more you have to use a counter force because you have in fact collected more gravity. So just like you could analogize it to rain. And you could say the more rain that hits you, the wetter you get, the more you have to use energy to dry yourself. So you can use lots of analogies. The more suntan you're going to get, and more likely it is you get the skin cancer and all the other crap. So any one of those analogies perfectly works, perfectly explains this is a real force differential. Okay, and the simple truth is there's an amount of force coming through that area per second, and the fewer seconds you spend in that area, the less gravitational force you will have to resist or counteract to stay on your course in a direction. Now, of course, there's still gravity over here, and of course, there's gravity over here, and that will also be time dependent, and it'll also matter how fast you travel through that gravity. It doesn't change anything. It's just saying that you can break like an integral. You can break any kind of voyage into a piece, and you can just say how much is it per piece. So anyway, the real giveaway here, the real interesting part, is the fact that it doesn't matter what direction you're going. So even if I'm going towards the gravitational body, this differential still exists. It could be 4.9 here, and it could be 9.8 here. And the fact is, if I travel through that differential, the fact is it's just going to matter how much time it takes me to go through that differential will decide how much extra velocity I get. So if I start off going very fast and I only spend 1 second going through this differential, I'm only going to get a total that's going to be some average between 4.9 and 9.8. And I'll get, say, 1 second worth. But if I'm going very slowly, then I'm going to gain a lot from the differential. So if it takes 10 seconds for me to go from point A to the surface, point B, the fact is I'll acquire... frozen computer. God damn it. It seems it's going to do it every single time, so I'm going to have to reboot before every single video, which is really annoying. But I guess that's what I have to do. Alright, continuing where we left off. Yeah, so the objects going towards are going to be affected the same way. So the MGH doesn't work. So if you have something that starts with a velocity, okay, this formula will not get you anywhere close to a right answer. Alright, so it's not going to work. And the simple truth is it's going to be MGT will tell you the right answer. So how much time it takes to get from point A to point B will tell you how much gravitational energy you can collect. And the object that moves through that space quickly will acquire very little. If it's 1 second, then it's only 9.8 increase in its velocity. So it starts off 100 miles an hour. It's only going to be 109.8. Starts off 1,000 miles an hour. That would be even less time, so it would be even less than 9.8. So it would be a tiny increase in its velocity. But if it starts off not moving at all and spends 10 seconds acquiring velocity, then its increase in velocity could be rather dramatic. And it could end up going 100 miles an hour by the time it hits the Earth, because it spent lots of time collecting the force differential. So again, just like being in a stream, if this was a stream of water constantly flowing in this direction, it would just be about how long you're in the stream. And let's say the stream's moving the speed of light. Let's understand it's not moving 30 miles an hour. It's a very fast stream. And it's going to, you're going to acquire motion from it very quickly. You know, at the whatever the rate is of the gravitational, the pressure potential. Yeah, there's no avoiding the rain. There's none of this. So all of the analogies, crossing a stream, okay, perfectly good analogy. You're going to go from point A to point B across a stream. That's a constant flow of water. It's just going to matter, okay, how long you take to go across. The faster you can swim, the less force you'll have to apply against the current to stay on course. Same for wind. All right, and it's all the analogies work perfectly well. They perfectly describe how the force functions, that there's an active field created by gravity. Gravity is an emergent function, okay? It's a consequence of there being created a differential in pressure, essentially. There's more pressure on one side. It's just simply pushing everything in the direction of the more pressure. And you acquire your, the wind blows into a sail, and the sail is basically the mass. Mass tells you how much sail you have. That tells you how much force you can collect. And if it was rain, you could just understand it that your mass is a bucket, and the bucket is going to collect rain as it falls. And the longer you're in the rain, the more rain that's going to be in the bucket. Analogies work perfectly. Okay. So it is claimed by these lunatics, assholes, liars, fucktards, shit-talking, obnoxious jackass fuckers, that they have somehow countered that and proven it's a distant dependent force. So that's not going to happen. We know it. I know it. I think if you have had half a brain, you know it. So we'll play this moronic video. So I have not watched any of these Gosling crap because he's an idiot and a moron. He doesn't pay any attention to any details whatsoever. He just pretends he knows something and he knows nothing. He's got no engineering instincts at all. He's a dummy and a jerk. He can't even measure, you know, can't tell the difference between 1 inch and 4 inches. So anyway.
Hello guys, I'm only doing this
Okay, and I'm only doing this because you're a fucking asshole. All right, and you just have to prove it to everyone on Earth. Somehow it's, you've got to make it more certain. You've got to make certain every thing that can think on this planet recognizes what a little weaselly jerk you are.
It's really because I feel it's important that somebody on the internet counteracts.
So he's going to counteract the simple argument that a stream is creating a differential. There's more pressure on one side of the water than there is on the other side. This side doesn't have any pressure. This side has a bunch of pressure, and the pressure pushes you downstream. He's going to counteract that argument, and you'll be pushed based on how long you're in the pressure. He's going to say that analogy doesn't work.
DraftScience, disinformation. And that's why I'm...
So, again, his is the disinformation. He's saying if a meteor's coming in at 50,000 miles an hour and it travels, a 3-mile span heading towards Earth, and it does that 3 miles in 1 second, that it will gain as much gravity, extra gravitational velocity, as an object going 1 mile an hour that takes 4 days to get to Earth. That those two things, because they traveled the same distance, that somehow they collected the same energy. It's absolutely ridiculous nonsense. Doesn't happen, never has happened, never will happen.
I'm going to do this. His phrase now is the exposure zone. Moving.
The object was always the same. There was always a point A to a point B. And again, you still haven't figured out how to write a simple little point A to point B. Yes, you're traveling a distance.
In the gravity, although this is rain, he's using this analogy, which is wrong, of course.
So it's absolutely accurate. Especially if you think of the rain as being infinitely fast. Okay, if you think of the rain as being photons, a rain of photons, a rain of little objects moving the speed of light. So there's no way you can run into them or run away from them. You can't catch more, by plowing into them somehow. It can't work. Can't hit one sideways ever.
As the exposure zone. So this would be the exposure zone. Anywhere between the two houses, because gravity is everywhere, isn't it? But the rain...
It's not everywhere the same. So it isn't. The fact is there's gravitational bodies. You can do a flyby by a planet. Right now, the gravitation from Jupiter is minuscule. I could spend 1 million years sitting here, and its gravitational potential won't move me, probably much at all. So, obviously, very little gravity. Very, 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 very little. And it's only when I get close that it becomes significant in terms of I'm going to have to start putting on my thrusters so I don't crash into Jupiter. So that's the simple argument. So to pretend that gravity is infinite in all places and exactly the same in all places is just idiotic. That's not the argument.
It's not.
It's clearly not applicable to the reality. The reality, there's zones that have high gravitational potential and zones that have very low gravitational potential. And so you can draw a line where there's high gravitational potential, and you can argue that you have to travel that line with sufficient velocity, or you're going to be having to fight a significant amount of gravity.
The rain is shielded by the house, so this is the exposure zone here. And remember, we're going over this is important because he says the fact that the car rolls 4 times as far, 4 times the distance.
Right, and I've been over it and over it and over it, right? And so it is, no doubt he's going to leave out of this analogy, right? So he's doing 2 different analogies at the same time, which is just idiotic. He's going to jump between the two. The two really don't have a damn thing to do with each other. Not a damn thing to do with each other. All right, so the simple fact is if you are using friction to take something's energy. That is, the car is not going to keep going. It's going to run out of energy. All right, so we're rolling two things. I mean, I've done this so many times. I mean, it's just incredible. And they won't honestly paraphrase this argument. They won't honestly respond to anything I say. They'll just dishonestly distort and pervert it. So the simple argument, if I go one velocity with this rolling object, what am I doing? I'm taking its energy. The ground, the contact with the ground is taking its energy. If I shot it in space, it would go forever. But no, I'm on the ground, and it's rolling on the ground. It's smashing the ground. It's jiggling the ground, as Feynman would say. And the fact is, if I give it twice the velocity, it will travel 4 times the distance, okay? But what does it also do as a fact, an absolute fact, is that it goes half the speed here. 3/4 of the way down the track, it goes half the speed. So quite obviously, this is exactly the same as this. It starts going 1v right here. And this completely duplicates this. And this is exactly 1 unit of time. And this is exactly 1 unit of time. And the fact is, this is the other unit of time. This is just 1 unit of time for this whole span here because of the higher velocity. So these 3 units of distance are done in the same amount of time as this 1 unit of distance. Quite obviously, okay, now we can use the thin ice analogy. If this was thin ice, okay, the fact is we're traveling very fast and we're applying less pressure into the ground. So the friction here per square inch, the pressure being applied by the object, is lower. It weighs less, essentially. It's collecting insufficient gravity to weigh its full weight. Here, going slowly, it pushes into the ground substantially because it's going slower, okay? It has more time. So the amount of time per square inch is completely different in these two circumstances. Very big here, okay, in terms of the amount of pressure, very small here, okay. And these are all linear, right? I could break this down, it would be doing the same thing. If I took this distance here, I can also break that into a 1, 3 scenario. Same exact scenario. And I can do that over and over and over again. It works all the way down, all the way up. Basic Galilean logic, and it's brilliant, and it's true, and it's a fact, and it's just a simple truth that you're going 4 times the distance, but you're doing it in twice the time, and you're only using twice the energy. You've only vibrated the ground with twice the energy. You didn't vibrate the ground with the same amount per inch. A lot more here, a lot less here. Absolute fact. You won't counter it with anything reasonable or logical. I didn't need to pause, okay? Hopefully I wasn't paused.
By going twice the velocity is purely down to the fact that it's moving through the gravity faster. So it's collecting less gravity, collecting less force, enabling it to go that much further. Well,
yes, it's losing less to the ground. So you have to have the component in there to recognize that it doesn't have a motor running. It has a certain amount of momentum to start, and you're going to take its momentum through the friction it's creating with the ground. The fact is, it's creating less per inch pressure on the ground the faster it goes. That's the argument, and it clearly is illustrated in the outcome, which is it's going half the velocity after it's traveled 3/4 of the distance.
Let's examine this exposure zone. This is the paint sprayer spraying out the aerosol droplets, and this would be the exposure zone.
It's another great analogy. It also creates the inverse square law, which is nice. It's in 3 dimensions. The paint spray is spreading at the inverse square law, just like photons. And so it makes it even a more perfect analogy.
So anything, the object of the paint that you're going to paint, is outside of the exposure zone here, and it would move in the exposure zone, getting painted, and then it would move outside the exposure zone where it's not painted. Of course, this rain analogy.
What the fuck? So where did he explain how that's not exactly how it works? And the faster you move through the paint spray, the less paint spray that gets on you, the less counter force you have to apply. Where did he make the argument? So he just jump cuts right out of the whole fucking thing. What the fuck was that? What is this nonsense? This is worse than I knew it was going to be garbage, and this is just garbage. This is a waste of time. Here's the paint spray analogy. Forget it. Let's just move on.
It's not painted. Of course, this rain analogy, the exposure zone is between the two houses, where you are not getting wet in the house, then you're getting wet in the exposure zone, and then you're dry again.
You're traveling a distance. The faster you travel the distance, the less rain hits you. The less time you're in the sunlight, the less tan you get. I mean, duh.
Another one he uses is the sunbather, and the exposure zone to the radiation would be anywhere that you can catch the sun rays. Outside of the exposure zone would be anywhere that there is shade. Now, you may have noticed that as yet there has been no example that fulfills the requirement of gravity on Earth, i.e. the car that moves 4 times the distance.
I don't know how they're not examples. And again, you can only give examples through analogy. I can't compare gravity to gravity or gravity or nagazati because it's the same thing. There isn't some same thing I can compare it to. I can only compare it to things that are insanely similar. So yes, sunlight's insanely similar. So we're just saying the amount your car gets tanned is going to be dependent on how fast it's going through the sun. And as the car slows down, it'll get more and more tanned. More and more sun will be hitting it. And if we think of the sun as being weight, it'll get heavier and heavier the slower it moves. I mean, it's really not complicated.
Twice velocity rolling down the ramp. Because it's always in the exposure zone. There is no exposure zone.
So that would lie. It's not. It's going from point A to point B. It's going to run out of fuel and stop. There's clearly a distance you're saying it's going to traverse. So what the fuck are you talking about? Again, we're not talking about moving a car at 60 miles an hour and it continues to keep going at 60 miles an hour. We're talking about taking the energy away from it, converting its momentum into vibrations in the ground. If we were launching it in space, it's absolute fact it won't go 4 times the distance. Something going twice the velocity in space, okay, where there's no friction, it will not travel 4 times the distance. But you're not going to be taking the energy away from it. So it's just going to keep going at twice the speed. It's always going to be twice as fast. It will go it's completely different circumstance. It will not travel 4 times the distance. It will only travel twice the distance. Absolute fact. So what are you pretending you don't understand the experiment? I've been over it hundreds of times, literally 100 times. I have drawn this shit on the board. And this moron is pretending he doesn't understand the argument?
There is no getting out of the exposure zone. So where's the example that he uses for the Earth's gravity? The only example used for the Earth's gravity is the...
So again, just a lie. I'm not using it as an example of the Earth's gravity. I'm making it as a declarative statement. It's an absolute fact that this is how gravity works. And again, where's the point A and the point B? Do we see them? No. He just can't draw an A and a B. It's above his, competency.
Rocket flying past a planet. But of course, this again has the exposure zone. This we could call the exposure zone here.
There you go.
Here, the rocket ship is pretty much out of the gravity, has no effect.
Well, it does have an effect, but again, it's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how much work will the rocket have to do to stay on course. It wants to go from point A to point B. How much work will it have to do to stay on course? That is, add extra thrust to maintain its course. And that amount of thrust it will have to use will be entirely dictated by how long it stays in this differential. And the quicker it gets through this differential, the less thrust, the less counter energy it will have to use to keep its course. That's the argument. It's exactly accurate. It's completely true. It's exactly how it works. And you will say nothing or do nothing to counter it in any way whatsoever.
It's only within the gravitational field here in this exposure zone. So this example, yet again, is not fulfilling the requirement of the car moving 4 times the distance along the surface of the Earth, because it's always in the exposure zone and there is no escaping the exposure zone.
So again, it's a complete lie. It travels a complete distance from point A and it goes to point B. That's how it could be 4 times the distance, is it stops at point B. It stops. What do you mean? It keeps going forever at the same speed. That's not the fucking goddamn analogy. And look, I mean, if I have to tell people, never did I ever suggest or describe the car as continuing to travel at its maximum speed or even its lowest speed. It, of course, stops. The car going 1V stops. It stops. The car going 4V stops 4 times further. I mean, fuck. I mean, it's just, this is just... Again, yeah, this is why I didn't play the video. This is why I didn't watch the videos, because obviously this is useless, retarded nonsense. I might as well talk to an actual mongoloid.
Of course, on the surface of the Earth, the car has collected the maximum force it can collect at any instant.
So he's saying it doesn't matter how fast the car is going, okay, across a gravitational differential, it will collect the same total gravity. And that is not true. Yes, the car is collecting the same amount per unit of time, but it's obviously applying less to the ground. Jesus Christ.
It's saturated with the gravity. What it does, how it moves, is not going to affect it. The amount of time that it spends in it is not going to affect it.
It's going to affect the ground, just like thin ice. The faster you go across the thin ice, the less pressure you'll put on the ice. Now, obviously, the amount of pressure you're going to collect is going to be dependent on how long you're standing in the collection zone. But the fact is, the less time you spend going across the ice, the less total gravity hits you and the less total gravity you put into the ice. The total pressure.
Because it's caught all the gravity it can catch. It's not like the man in the house that's dry and then he moves into the rain getting wet. The car is already wet with gravity.
And it's giving it away to the ground. And it can't give it away to the ground if it doesn't have contact with the ground. So if it has less contact with the ground, it can't give it the force it's collected. Quite obviously.
It cannot escape the gravity on the surface of the Earth. So he's contradicting himself here. It's collected its...
So there's no contradiction. My entire argument is about the point where this wheel hits this ground and transfers the energy. And clearly I've drawn it over and over and over again. There's less friction, less vibration of the ground the faster the car is going. The faster the car goes, the less of pressure it's losing to the ground. The faster I go across the thin ice, the less pressure I lose to the ground. I'm transferring less of my energy to the ground. Just a fact. Less of my weight is getting to the ground.
Maximum force instantly. It can't lose the force. What it does, how fast it moves, the force it's collected
that completely changes how much force it collects per foot is completely changed by the velocity. The faster it moves, the less gravity it collected, the less pressure it's putting onto the ground. It's just a fact.
Of course, cannot change. So this is disinformation. He's misleading people with this analogy.
All right, the analogies as described are perfect. The fact is, if he added the extra detail that it goes half the speed, 3/4 of the path down, clearly illustrates that, and it obviously does this in the same time it does this, clearly indicating it's about time. You gave the ground the same force in this 3 miles that you'll give the ground in the last mile. The last mile will be just as expensive to the ground as the first 3 miles. You'll vibrate it the same frickin' amount.
You see, the time in the rain here is important. If he comes out of the house in the dry and the man is in the rain for a second, you get so wet. If he was in the house being dry and he came out and spent 10 seconds in the rain, he would be 10 times as wet. But the car is in the gravity constantly.
But it's not on the surface constantly, and it's not applying the same pressure to the surface constantly. That's the whole point. When it's traveling fast, it's applying less pressure per square inch. When it's traveling slowly, it's applying more pressure per square inch. Absolute fact, and I said it over and over again, it weighs less. The faster it goes across the surface, the less it weighs.
Already maximum wet. It's caught as much of the force as it can. What it does, how fast it moves, where it goes here will make no difference. How much time it spends here will make no difference.
So of course it will make a difference to the ground. So that's the obvious point being made. The contact with the ground is essentially how the energy is being taken from the vehicle. It's exactly the reason why it eventually runs out of fuel, is because it had to give all of its momentum to the ground. That's exactly how it loses it, and it loses less in the first 3/4 of distance traveled. It's losing it at 1/4 of the rate that it lost it in the last quarter it travels. And that's the truth, because of the velocity.
It's saturated with gravity. This is why I will keep on.
And again, it has nothing to do with the fact that the ground is not being saturated with its mass. Its mass is differential. The mass is less, applying less force to the ground the faster it moves across the ground. The less pressure per square inch. Absolute fact that you have totally ignored and pretended you have in some way debunked, which is nonsense.
Arguing this point because it's important that people are not suffering.
So who's lying and deceiving? Okay, to pretend that the pressure applied to the ground is the same no matter how fast the car moves is deceiving people. It's nonsense. The good news is nobody's stupid enough to believe you, so it's not a big threat. So, all right. So anyway, he didn't debunk this paint sprayer, didn't debunk the sunshine, and didn't debunk the gravity argument, the simple point A to point B argument. The faster you go across the gravitational field, the less you'll have to counteract the gravity, because you in fact absorbed less of it. Absolute fact. Okay, so no debunking happened here, no refutation, no
disinformation.
No disinformation corrected. So just another lie title by a compulsive liar. Every one of his videos is a lie title. He has absolute shit videos where he measured shit wrong, and he's still arguing they're good videos, and the titles are honest and real, and they're complete distortions of reality, complete perversions, complete. You talk about disinformation, it's willful deception. All right, so fuck this asshole. And, all the Humpty Dumpty characters that keep him together. Just this egghead, cracked egg. All right. Anyway, till the next time. Such. Yuck. So this was waste. It was wasted time, right? I mean, he didn't fairly paraphrase any of the arguments. And he clearly isn't pointing out how Susskind is wrong to analogize gravity to a non-compressible fluid. He certainly isn't explaining how it doesn't push things. When yes, it clearly does push things at a rate. And the rate Newton discovered is 9.8 meters per 1 second. So every second it's 9.8 meters of velocity gained, which is pressure enabled. All right. Times your mass, it'll tell you how much pressure you have. Your velocity times your mass tells you how much pressure you can apply. And that is your fucking energy. And nothing else is. Momentum is energy. Nothing more. No squared functions. Alright, till the next time and such. Again, I mean, do I really have to keep saying it? It's 9.8 meters per 1 second, not per seconds. Okay, till the next time. I just noticed something that's just pretty funny. So somebody called Richard Pepstein or something in Infamy 6 Mile or whatever the hell all that crap is. Said this video responds to all your gravity claims. What it in full. What it in full. So it doesn't, can't even write a rational sentence. And post the link to the video I just played. Hilarious. I mean, it's just so funny. Oh, what absolute garbage. I mean, fuck. I might as well just block the asshole. What nonsense. Completely refutes that gravity is... He showed how gravity is not time dependent. Oh, yeah, sure he did. Too ridiculous. All right, nothing else in my comment section anyway. Okay, so that was just pretty funny. So anyway, till next time and such.